Hello and welcome to today's broadcast. I've titled it Truth Social, Florida Man Makes Announcement, and Twitter 2.0. So those will be our topics. Feel free to chime in with a comment if you're viewing on YouTube or Twitch. But unfortunately, the site I'm using for streaming doesn't. I can't see or respond to Twitter comments. How long will Twitter last as a platform, though? It does seem that Elon Musk is rapidly burning through goodwill with advertisers. In fact, I heard in the last hour or so that he may be looking for a new acting CEO to take over for himself, the magical genius entrepreneur. He's damaging Tesla's brand so much. He didn't invent the concept of electric cars, but he definitely did do a good job of marketing that company and advancing that brand, whether through use of skillful bots or marketing strategies. I don't know the combination of strategies that brought him that success, the ability to apply for loans and to falsify details on loan applications to the government. All of these things, I think his younger counterpart, Elon Musk, is capable of doing. So what are my tasks? I am broadcasting today because I want to encourage more white people to hold criminals to account, whether it be in a commercial, in a consumer, or an electoral sense, because white people have a certain set of white people have too strong a developed capacity to ignore blatant criminality, to ignore misconduct and antisocial behavior from people because of this superstition that great wealth is accompanied by greatness in other characteristics. So great wealth or great appearance of wealth is not accompanied by great business sense, as we can see with Musk's purchase of Twitter for $44 billion and then massively undermining its value and deterring advertisers, shedding most of Twitter's revenue by making it an unstable platform that advertisers don't feel safe advertising on because of the risk of reputational damage to their companies. So yes, that's my job. I'm an Australian. I've moved to the United States. I live here now with my family. Before I moved here, I was also broadcasting on this topic to help bring people into the urgency of the moment. And to do that, I'm going to share an article. So I'm going to take Madison Cawthorn off the screen. I put him up there because he made an announcement in support of Trump. And it's interesting. It's going to be interesting watching the cannibalism, the Republicans in disarray, because there's a certain asymmetry to Trump support. The gentry conservatives have moved in the main part to support DeSantis because he's like Trump, but less obviously mired down in investigations for criminal behavior. He's like Trump, but he has instigated less violent acts like the insurrection of January the 6th, 2021. So people who are part of the Republican coalition that support Republicans because they short-sightedly oppose tax on themselves and people in their peer group of middle class or upper middle class stock market speculators. They want to keep all of the money for themselves, and they don't understand that there's a role in American greatness for investment in infrastructure from the government, and that's actually how you create a strong foundation for wealth creation. And without it, with a crumbling road system, with underfunded public schools, you have less of a basis for the kind of success that America has a strong reputation for. So libertarians do a lot to damage not only the American brand, but the American reality. They do a lot to damage everyone's experience of America, because when you have Republicans holding office in powerful ways, they definitely underfund a lot of the public infrastructure that we all rely on in order to be able to flourish and have our children flourish and be safe. Republicans definitely undermine safety laws, including anti-pollution laws, gun safety laws, well-funded schools, well-funded hospitals. All of those things make an increasing number of people in America unsafe. And when Democrats hold office, not all politicians who belong to the Democratic Party are by definition perfect, but the policy exists that is at least sufficiently in tune with the reality of how a well-funded infrastructure supports the ability of a nation and its citizens and its residents to not only survive, but to flourish and to create excellence. So good on America for the excellence it brings to the table. Hello, Christopher. Nice to see you. I should get straight to this article instead of my preamble. I found it today. The New York Times first article about Hitler's rise is absolutely stunning, and that's not a complimentary use of the word stunning. It has an assertion. It was published in 1922, and it asserts that Hitler's anti-Semitism was not so violent or genuine as it sounded. So that's 1922. Hitler's anti-Semitism was extraordinarily violent and genuine, even if it was perceived by the New York Times and by other people in Germany as a ploy. And that's something I want to draw a parallel with Trump. If you say, oh yes, his divisive language is just a ploy, he's trying to whip up his followers to be agitated against an enemy that he's identified, he's not just doing that as a rhetorical flourish. The ploy is also the roadmap. So whoever Trump says, oh yes, these are the villains, the media are the enemy of the state, the Democrats are inspired by demons and they'll get rid of the Bible. That is a roadmap that he provides to his followers and to his advisors. It is his intention as well as his strategy. So you can never dismiss the hate rhetoric from Trump as just something he says. It's something he's trying to make happen in the world, because as cruelty ratchets up, it creates a chaotic ladder for charlatans to climb. Ooh, I like my sentence. I'm going to write it down. I'm always trying to find phrases that invite people in. We all have to be storytellers in this point in time in our history, because human comfort and inertia are something we all enjoy, but also our downfall. If we stay comfortably ignorant about climate change, if we stay comfortably ignorant about the threats to public safety posed by gun-centric Republicans or gun-indulgent Republicans. They indulge gun manufacturers, they indulge billionaire welfare. That's what the tax cuts for billionaires are. They want subsidies from the public purse. They want your tax dollars to support their activities and their gambles, their gambling maneuvers, their business enterprises. They want a nice soft cushion of your money for them if they fall, because everything they do, they see as a favor to you, to the general public. And they don't want to have to accept the consequences of their own actions. They want to be able to play with the money from banks, money from investors, to take all that trust from investors, and then if everything fails, they don't want to have to wear negative consequences. They want to just be able to declare bankruptcy and then clean slate, and they can start to make more ventures and more gambles. And they think what they're doing is such a gift that they might employ others. And that's a type of narcissism and placing an unreasonable amount of value on the services they provide to society. I mean, teachers nurses, health professionals provide services to society. Executives who take risks and make decisions in the face of the unknown. That's a degree of audacity that's often accompanied by audacity. Did I say audacity already? Bravery plus audacity plus narcissism. And you get a lot of American corporate culture. So it's preferable when there's less narcissism involved, because narcissists are people who will throw you under the bus and drive over you merrily if they are in pursuit of their own goals, profit expansion. So let's see. The Times correspondent documented what he saw as the factors behind Hitler's early rise. He exerts an uncanny control over audiences, possessing the remarkable ability to not only rouse his hearers to a fighting pitch of fury, but it will turn right around and reduce the same audience to docile coolness. Well, I know a lot of people who personally can't stand listening to hear Trump speak, but for those whose values are sufficiently in alignment that they find him bearable to listen to, you'll often hear them laughing at the points he pauses at for comedy. He's denigrating often Democrats or the left or the media, and they laugh because they feel united with Trump, that those are the enemies of what they want, which is an electoral system that preserves disproportionate white influence and disproportionate white welfare, and a distorted pandering to white people. As you all probably know, before the Brown versus Board of Education decision, white people got all the public money for schools that catered to white children. And there was a much lower, disproportionately low amount of funds that went to schools that catered to Black children, because segregation was the law of the land, and it was a type of theft that was at that stage legal, that Black Americans could pay tax and that they would not get a commensurate benefit from government expenditure, that the government felt safe in underinvesting in Black children, and that their schools were so under-resourced relative to white schools that Black parents had to take a case to the Supreme Court to ask to be integrated into white schools, just so that their children could be the beneficiaries of that same level of excellence in terms of resource provision. And when Republicans get into office now and they campaign on school choice, it's essentially a ruse to rehabilitate segregation, or to provide a mechanism for segregation to occur using public funds through giving parents vouchers so they can choose to send their children to private schools that will not be governed by that Supreme Court decision from 1953 that said you cannot have segregated schools. You cannot exclude Black children from your school. Private schools still can. Private schools don't have to submit their criteria for admittance, and you can have academies that are essentially white only. And that's what the Republican school choice campaigns are all about achieving. Underfunding public education until the point that more parents become desperate, and in their desperation begin to support that campaign for school choice, for receiving a voucher and using it to send their children, use that tax dollar created voucher to send their child to a private school, and then have those private schools, whether the parents were intending this or not, be ways to funnel public funding towards predominantly white schools, white attended schools. How's everybody else's projects going at the moment? I had this project of an aspirational project of writing a newsletter, and I wanted to do it before the midterms occurred, but at least I knew that even after the stress of the midterms were gone, that work is still there to be done. We have to make an effort to communicate with each other, and white people have that responsibility very strongly because that's the only demographic that still is majority voting for Trump. White men and white women still have a majority of that subset of the population who choose to vote for Republican candidates. For Trumpublicans, all of them are tarred with that brush of enabling and facilitating crimes against the American people. Because when Trump wasn't in public office, he just committed crimes against his investors, the people who chose to invest in him, against banks who loaned him money, against the tax office. His crimes involved keeping two sets of books. There's been details lately from the trial of his Trump organization that shows the accountants were giving instructions to their underlings to wipe off the chief financial officer's name from the list of perks that were given to him. So he got to reduce his salary, which was taxable, and instead receive luxury cars rented to him, to his wife, rent-free apartments, private tuition at expensive schools for his grandchildren, that the organization could give Allen Weisselberg and then reduce his income by a commensurate amount and go, yay, we get to pay you less because we are exchanging favors here, and your favor is that you have income off the books that you are avoiding tax. It's not smart. It's literally a crime to have two books, to fudge your accounting in that way. It is fraudulent behavior, but the only people who were victimized by that at that point were people who lent money to Trump, mom and pop investors, and yes, more broadly, the American people who were paying tax themselves whilst Trump and his employees minimized their taxable income and defrauded the public in that way. But once Trump went to office, of course, he could victimize the American public much more profoundly. He could pretend that the pandemic wasn't a problem in order to create a fraudulent division of people who distrusted him and trusted doctors, and then people who submitted to Trump's version of events and said, right, COVID isn't real. Trump is telling me the truth. I don't have to socially distance or mask. And I can probably distrust this whole vaccine thing as well, because it's all from these people who Trump has assured me are overhyping the risk. And so even if at moments Trump acknowledged the risk, he still then tried to use that to create racial animus, to create irrational hatred against people of Asian appearance in the United States by falsely attributing the whole pandemic to the Chinese government, but not even specifying Chinese government, just saying the China virus, so that people would, so that he could foment a negative association between people of potentially Chinese appearance and the rest of America suffering through the consequences of a pandemic, so that people on the edge of sanity, people close to succumbing to sociopathic impulses, would then be triggered by the sight of an Asian person and commit acts of violence. Those people chose to act in that way, but a precipitating factor was Trump's racist rhetoric. And that's why racism is something we condemn, not just because we deem it to be bad. It's because we recognize the destructive path that racism is the first step along. Racism is the precipitating factor. Racism is the triggering event. Racism gives people the scaffold on which to channel their violent impulses. Racism gives people a story to which the conclusion is violence. So we notice the most obvious acts of violence, but the microaggressions, the choosing not to frequent Asian businesses, the I'm imagining that there would have been a lot more hostility towards Asian children in schools, because some children will do the right thing and some children will build on the scaffold laid out by adults to say, elevate yourself by denigrating others. And this is the direction. It can work from a protective impulse, protect the tribe, cultivate hostility towards the outside tribe in order to refine your instincts to be able to commit acts of violence to protect your tribe. But for children, what that looks like is misdirected bullying. And for Trump, was happy to lean into the worst of human nature, to hand out permission slips for people to exercise their worst selves. All right, let's move on to the next topic. What have I said? Florida man makes announcement. This is true. I'm going to go back to Twitter because there's a couple of videos and I wanted to share and get anybody else's thoughts on Madison Cawthorn endorsing Trump. So what's notable here is that he's the only former congressperson who attended Trump's announcement event in Mar-a-Lago. And he chastises people for not supporting Trump and says that Trump, he gives various reasons, and I'm going to summarize them all before I present them, because his reasons involve falsely describing Trump's actions. So falsely describing the way that Trump introduced tariffs as part of an ostensible trade war with China that actually just involved Trump damaging trade relationships, damaging the market for imported goods into the United States. Sorry, not damaging the market, damaging the ability of American importers to bring in and sell goods, because reselling things is what a lot of American businesses do. Think Walmart, think Target, think about all the manufactured products you buy that are from China, and how in the short term, what a tariff does is raise prices on the goods you consume without necessarily facilitating the development of a manufacturing industry without furthering the growth of America's manufacturing industry. It hurt America's manufacturing industry because sometimes component parts are imported from China and then American manufacturers assemble them. Does that make sense? American industries were harmed. There was significant contraction in the manufacturing sector that was notable in 2019 when that sector entered into a recession, as acknowledged by various economists who were beginning to point this out in increasingly strident ways until COVID happened, and Trump then pandered to the Chinese government by pretending that it was all under control. So he purposefully and willfully bought into the false narrative from that government at the time that it wasn't at risk of spreading to other countries, that nobody had anything to be afraid of. And he did so specifically to get a Chinese government signature on a trade deal that he hoped to brandish as a distraction from the recession that he created, the growing manufacturing sector recession that was being discussed in newspapers in 2019, October of 2019. Trump brandished a trade deal on January the 19th. But the media already had something to talk about, and the media already had an anemically weak ability to hold Trump to account for his bad policy decisions. They would talk about his tweets, they would talk about his moods. Maggie Haberman is mistress of distracting people away from the most impactful harms committed by Trump against Americans. But yes, COVID happened, and Trump then pandered to a false narrative that it wasn't going to be a problem for the United States, all the whilst participating in recorded conversations with Bob Woodward about how, yes, COVID was a big threat, COVID was airborne, COVID impacted more than the elderly, COVID could harm people of all backgrounds. And the harm that Trump did to public trust in public health is, I'm not going to say unquantifiable, because researchers may try to quantify it and say, look, the death rate in the United States was so much higher in 2020 than in other nations, and draw some conclusions about what role Trump had, what role his anti-public health rhetoric had in undermining the capacity of people in the United States to trust public health officials and to trust their advice, their life-saving critical advice to reduce transmission, to reduce spread of this disease by participating in social distance guidelines or mandates. I mean, in Sweden, they had less of the mandates, but the population acted, they really took on a lot of the guidelines. So they reduced their interactions with people in public. So they illustrated the point that you don't always have to have mandates, but Trump made it an act of commendable civil disobedience to push back against mandates, to push back against mask mandates or vaccine mandates. He made it a point of contrarian pride, and we're still suffering from that. It reduces the ability of the Biden administration to get majority public buy-in for actually dealing with this ongoing pandemic in a way that is necessary to keep children out of pediatric hospitals. Pediatric hospitals are overflowing, but a lot of members of the public have lost the ability to comply with guidelines or lost the ability to take COVID seriously. And it's not just because humans can't adopt public health measures. It's because humans take on whatever narrative is dominant. And the Trumpy people were persistent. They were, not only Trump, but his allies have been so persistent in their strategy of denigrating Dr. Fauci, denigrating anybody who recommended science-based guidelines for behavior, that I think this administration has largely washed their hands of containing COVID. A lot of people in the Senate, including Democrats today, voted to end the emergency declaration. And the emergency is not over. I'm hoping Biden will veto that proposed end to the emergency declaration. There's a lot of people still relying on health insurance provisions that occur as a consequence of that particular emergency declaration. So, yes. Christopher says, I'm surprised that Trump has not been held accountable for the lives of several hundred thousand Americans during the early period of COVID when he knowingly withheld information. I know, and it's almost as if reality is really giving us a chance to learn about how much pandering there is to wealthy people in positions of power, that it becomes so difficult to hold them to, or so apparently difficult to hold them to account when, in an effective way, because at least electorally, some moderates, some independents were prepared to recognize that Republicans should not be allowed near positions of power because it's an abuse. It's an abuse of the American public to elect people who supported Trump's chaos and Trump's undermining of public health, Trump's facilitation of disease transmission and consequently suffering and death. But not enough. I mean, we need, at least Trump lost the House and then the Senate and the presidential office. And then these midterms, his endorsed candidates largely lost. And all of those who adopted his election denying strategies, they lost. A lot of them don't have the appearance of wealth to sell that. I think it illustrates that Americans will buy ridiculous lies from people if they are wealthy, that too many people make an attribution error of attributing greatness and common sense and benevolence to wealthy people. And that's an attribution error that we have to be able to fix without becoming communists, because communism is just like fascism, another strategy or another path for a political system to develop that involves consolidated, centralized power that lends itself to abuse of power. Fascism is a system of governance, but it's a circumstance that evolves from people being emotionally manipulated through appeals to patriotism, through appeals to preservation of the social fabric from backstabbing scapegoats, whether those scapegoats be Jews or gay people or trans people or migrants. Protect our authentic rights, protect our scarcity myth. Myth being migrants might take what is ours and we will lose. Instead of the scarcity myth, you should have the richness reality, which is that migrants, people with the flexibility to move to your country, are bringing a skill set that allows them to end labor bottlenecks and facilitate the growth of different industries that may have their potential to grow shackled by a lack of suitable labor. Migrants contribute to American richness of experience, culinary experience, but also reduce inflation and help balance out an upward pressure on wages and corporate desires to minimize labor costs. At the extreme of corporations wanting to minimize labor costs, you have the type of people who are comfortable with slavery, who are comfortable exploiting child labor, who are comfortable exploiting loopholes in America's 14th Amendment, which stipulates that slavery is illegal except when imposed on people who are incarcerated. That is the loophole in America's 14th Amendment, and there is an enormous industry in the private prison sector built to exploit that and to indulge a hankering for slavery, to indulge that desire to so depress the cost of paying workers that they can take advantage of a system that allows them to pay people 2 cents an hour because they're in jail, because public sympathy for people who've been jailed is often very low. So they exploit our lack of compassion. They exploit the dehumanization of people found guilty and imprisoned. Christopher says, I think our laws need to be adjusted so that wealthy individuals are no longer allowed to abuse laws and policies that the everyday American is subject to. Yes, that's the ideal, isn't it? When the rule of law holds firm regardless of wealth or status. And it's an ongoing struggle dynamic. And this way, says Christopher, it will not matter what a certain group of people think, the law will prevail. Well, exactly. We are defending the rule of law, and we realize now we're defending it not just from criminals, we're defending it from a level of public passivity and public superstition, a superstition that that falsely equates wealth, great wealth, with greatness of character. Elon Musk is being so ridiculous right now with his ridiculous decisions with regards to Twitter. His pursuit of an $8 subscription fee whilst preventing advertisers from being able to sustain any type of confidence in the platform. Elon Musk was so quick to fire content moderators and fire people who protect your data, who protect the data that Twitter has from being hacked, and instead saying, no, give me your credit card details for an $8 subscription, an $8 a month subscription, while I fire everybody who would be in charge of protecting your credit card details from being hacked, or drive them away, or insist that they change from a work from home terms of employment that they've signed up for in a contract to having to come in for a 40-hour work week and be hected all day. So Elon Musk is driving away the critical employees who hold up the platform of Twitter in pursuit of this $8 a month model, which is largely being used by people who promote cryptocurrency and pornography. So people have done some statistical analysis of who exactly is paying that $8 a month, and it's low-key criminals and purveyors of porn. People from the less productive fringe elements of society. And no shade to sex workers, but social media platforms aren't typically the place to distribute pornography. Twitter is relatively rare. Other social media platforms don't allow pornography on their platforms, or at least make an effort to content moderate pornography off their platforms. Not Twitter. And Elon Musk is trying to lean into that in order to make up for his rapidly evaporating profits from advertisers, from big brand advertisers who had budgets for Twitter and can very easily and have very easily withdrawn those budgets. All right. Oh, I haven't listened to, let's listen to how Madison Cawthorn defends Trump so that I can pause it and we can try and develop good antidotes. It's like trying to find an antidote for brain poison. Antidotes to fraudulent stories. Okay, good. There are various frauds that are perpetrated on the American public, very pervasively adopted false stories. Fraudulent stories that suck Americans into being complicit into their own exploitation. I sound a little bit like a communist now, but I assure everybody I am not. Corporations employ people. They are not inherently bad, but some corporate executives definitely require not only regulation, but enforced regulation. Because otherwise they victimize people. They victimize people with the misfortune to live next to a factory. They victimize consumers if they're not governed by good legislation, good and enforced legislation. All right, what's Madison Cawthorn got to say?
I will follow this man until the day I die, barring some terrible information, but this man has bled for us. This man has fought for us. This man has put his entire career,
Isn't that interesting? He says barring some terrible information, because of course there is a lot of terrible information. Trump stole government documents. He has made all sorts of contradictory efforts to defend himself, saying that the documents were planted by the FBI, that the documents were actually personal documents and he classified them, that he declassified the documents by pure force of mind, that he didn't have to follow a process because he's the president. He has pushed a lot of fraudulent stories on the American public, knowing that a lot of people have an appetite for fraudulent stories as long as they feel the general intention is to preserve a system of white welfare and white adjacent favoritism. Preserve white welfare, billionaire welfare, and white adjacent favoritism. Because you know what? People who perceive themselves to be white adjacent, I'm thinking about Herschel Walker, Candace Owens, they derive power and money and status from accessing those systems of self-sustaining white supremacy. They derive money, influence, and power from pandering to white supremacist points of view. They derive money, influence, and power from helping to whitewash racism and racist libertarianism. Racist libertarianism that says, I hate taxes, but really you mostly hate paying taxes if you think it's going to benefit people who aren't in your tribe, your self-selected tribe. And that's how we account for white favoring libertarians, white pandering libertarians, and also the racism of white Christian nationalists who want to preserve America and they want to preserve positions of power for who they deem to be authentic Americans, and they credit America's development to white Christians, and they believe Jesus is white, and they believe there's some kind of inherent purity and goodness associated with whiteness, and they have a type of dysfunctional narrative attachment that limits their emotional growth and limits their ability to engage with reality and the reality of the contribution of Black Americans, migrant Americans, Jewish Americans of all different religious backgrounds. America was not built exclusively by white Christian nationalists. No. And the founding fathers, the founding parents of America often had to fight to assert the importance of a separation between church and state. Because yes, often tribal instincts lead people into an embrace of ethno-nationalism, where you say, yes, we're a nation and we know we're all together because we can identify each other by the homogeneity of our skin color. We're all white, so we're all together, and we can be strong in our opposition to Native Americans as we dispossess them and steal from them. We can be united and we can have solidarity in our whiteness as we fight off other countries. But the truth is, the protection of white supremacy is a shifting umbrella. You might think you're covered by it one moment, you're gay and white, so you can vote Republican, but the next minute they're describing you as groomers and whipping up a moral panic that you are hurtful to the Republic of the United States, to the Republic Democrat, the system of democracy that involves being a democratic republic. Got to always remember to say democratic republic, because one branch of their false stories is the lie that America is not a democracy, or was not constructed as a democracy, and should not endure as a democracy. And they reject democracy because they reject the will of the people. They reject the multi-plural nature of America, and they reject the multi-plural nature of American success, which is that American success is contingent on the contributions from migrants of all skin color, all ethnicities, all religious backgrounds and persuasions. That is American attractiveness to migrants and to people of Black Americans who have fought so hard for decency in this country, in sharp contrast to the various oppressions and injustices that have been inflicted on them in a collective sense. And they have still fought for the better principles of America, the better principles that are enshrined in the Constitution, and the better principles that have endured in spite of all of the various white supremacist backlashes across American history, in spite of all of the various pro-white riots that have occurred in burning down various Black-owned businesses and Black-owned towns, churches, schools, and hospitals. There has often, throughout the course of American history, been a backlash by people who have dysfunctionally adopted white supremacy as their core defining story. And they can't cope with evidence that contradicts that story. Just as many Americans could not cope with the excellence of a Black president. who was successful because he told Americans their own story in a very persuasive and uplifting way, because he spoke to the greatness that derives from looking forwards together and not just dwelling on past ways of explaining things that were not always functional and not always inclusive. He was like, we can look together. We can look forwards together. And that triggered, I say this word advisedly, a whole bunch of racist Republicans to form the Tea Party, to donate vast amounts of money at a collective level to trying to undermine President Obama whilst he was in office, and to ensure that he had a lack of success in midterm elections. The level of negative partisanship in the midterm elections, which means the level of turnout strength amongst Republicans who had just lost the presidential election whilst a Democratic candidate and Black man succeeded. The fervor with which they turned out was a function of their racism, whether they know it or not. Some of the fervor with which they embraced Tea Party theories was a function of how wholeheartedly they believed the country could not prosper under Obama, and that they were willing to make all sorts of far-fetched interpretations of his actions and his conduct, and to claim that he was fueling racial division because he said even minor comments that were supportive of the dignity of Black Americans. I'm remembering specifically there was a Black professor who was arrested outside his house for going into his own house by police officers, and President Obama mentioned that this was not cool, and this was cause for great confected outrage. All right. Goodness, I've been talking for a little while. Thank you for listening. More of Madison Cawthorn, more sussing out the antidote.
Entire life, his entire persona, everything about him, everything about the Trump family, the children, him, his wife. He's put it all on the line for every single one of us. And so,
yeah, he's always subjugated the needs of Americans to his own advancement. He let hundreds of thousands of Americans die because he thought it would enhance his own prospects for re-election. And the level of callousness it takes to do that, it shows you that even if you vote for someone and you support someone because they express your values of racial hatred, it will not serve you. His life still means nothing to you. He is not loyal to you personally. He is just loyal to promoting your ideas. He is loyal to your shared ideas of white supremacy, of maintaining the architecture of white supremacy, maintaining the hidden architecture of white supremacy, because a lot of Black Americans have made a big effort to get us to use critical race theory to look at the trajectory of American laws, to look at the practice of American laws and how in practice it is often discriminatory, but also even in design, to look at how embedded the nature of not only favoring white people, but trying to amplify the imprisonment of Black Americans as much as possible in order to perpetuate a slavery dynamic for private prison owners to exploit, and companies who use private prison labor to exploit that slavery loophole, that pro-slavery loophole, and profit from it, to exploit and profit from the pro-slavery loophole in the 14th Amendment. Trying to write down things so that I can at least say, write your newsletter, Davina. You have already written down some of the things. And then I end up with a piece of paper with keywords on it. It doesn't look very tidy, but you know what? Sometimes good things can start in mess.
To the conservatives who are talking about, oh, well, maybe his time's over. Where is your loyalty? How can you look yourself in the mirror as a man and say, oh, well, I'll turn my back on somebody, when the going gets tough or when it's not a sure thing? This man fought for you. This man gave us a strong nation. He gave us strong foreign trade. He gave us strong trade policies. He got us out of foreign interventionism. He stopped spending, overpaying for NATO and for all. Okay. This man gave us a strong nation.
He gave us a strong nation. Okay, when Trump was in office, America's standing fell significantly around the world, and that has been documented by researchers in multiple countries and then put into graphs by Pew Research. So maybe we'll look that up, but that's the reality of Trump in office. He was a laughingstock as a president. And even though, yes, he definitely cultivated a strong element of hero worship amongst white supremacists in different countries. There are white supremacists in Australia who are devoted to Trump. I saw an interview with someone who had flown to America for the midterms in order to save America by working to support Republican candidates. And I presume they, like I do myself, I speak about the harms caused by elected Republicans and by Republican voters, the passive harms and the active harms that they inflict on all of us. But he was out there trying to help Republican candidates because he wanted to serve Trump and serve that shared vision. That shared vision of the authenticity of white value, of extraordinary, exceptional white value. I don't know. I've got to find a way to describe it that doesn't support it, because I don't want to pander to that particular story, that self-serving story.
He gave a strong foreign trade.
I've already covered that he really undermined foreign trade. He cost American farmers so much money that he had to dip into the American treasury to pay $28 billion to American farmers. And it wasn't distributed appropriately either. The payments from that were concentrated to large farmers and even some farmers who operated in America but weren't American-owned farms. And smaller farmers definitely were less protected from Trump's harmful policies with regards to trade.
Strong trade policies. He got us out of foreign interventionism.
Did he get America out of foreign interventionism? Well, it's Biden who oversaw the end of the war in Afghanistan, which was foreign interventionism, but Trump had set up a lot of those harmful criteria by withdrawing a lot of American troops from Afghanistan before he left office, just to make things more difficult, to booby trap Biden's early days in office.
He stopped spending, overpaying for NATO and for all of our alliances.
Yeah, there was room to encourage NATO participating nations to contribute more to NATO coffers. But Trump didn't decrease what America paid. He just advocated for European governments to increase what they paid. That's okay. I mean, he did it whilst also advancing Putin's agenda of undermining trust between America and NATO participating countries. So I'm not going to say that's a good thing, because pandering to Putin and abusing your diplomatic standing to weaken into European American cooperation, thus empowering Putin to eventually attack Ukraine. Those are bad things.
He made the world fear us. And you know what? I don't really want a president who is just loved and going to be hugged on and wear the exact same clothes as some freaking communist dictator does in China.
What? Who is he saying wears the same dictator clothes as China? Is he talking about Ron DeSantis? Is he talking about Joe Biden? What is he talking about? If you have a thought, let me know.
I want a president who people are terrified of, who's going to push people out of the way when he's walking up.
Well, that we come back to the cruelty is the point, a phrase popularized by Adam Serwer. The cruelty is the point, and it's always the point with performative strongmen. Mussolini, Stalin, Hitler, Fidel Castro, everybody who tries to consolidate central power and exploit people's wish to be seen as patriotic by saying, if you're against me, you're against this country, you're against this nation. I am this nation. My wishes are so magically connected to the wishes of this country that I'm not just a leader, I am the embodiment of America. And that is how Trump talks to his followers, as if by supporting him, you support America. And if you oppose him, you're anti-American. Performative strongmen are always attract death and destruction to their countries. So even if it gives people a short-term gratification of thinking, he's talking so strong and he makes me feel confident, and he dampens down my anxieties, and he gives me something to feel proud about, gives them pride, and then causes them harm. And some people are so thirsty for pride that they are prepared to overlook a lot of harm. Some people are so thirsty for manufactured pride that they will overlook a great deal of harm. They will overlook huge harms. Look at white women voting for Republicans. White women increased their turnout for Republican candidates, I think, in these midterms. And it's extraordinary because women's interests as a gender are so poorly served by Republicans, who have made it dangerous to be a woman in America because they have compromised maternal health care. So if you're pregnant and you have a complication, your access to appropriate medical care to save your life, to preserve your fertility, your organ functioning, to leave you with adequate levels of blood, that is compromised if you are in a state with Republican governance, because the Trump-stacked Supreme Court took away 50 years of precedent that deemed it to be a constitutional right that you could make a choice, not only make a choice about your reproductive system, but that you could receive timely medical treatment for any number of complications that occur alongside of miscarriages, that occur alongside of pregnancy. Instead, forcing women to carry potentially dead or dying fetuses until they can offer up sufficient proof to reassure medical professionals that their life is in danger and that they have indeed had a miscarriage. And there was a story that came out yesterday of a woman in Ohio who traveled to Ohio for her brother's wedding, who had already suffered a miscarriage, but her body had not expelled the fetal tissue. And her gynecologist, her obstetrician, advised her that she could just wait and eventually it would probably expel by itself without a problem. But the doctor gave her incomplete, really, advice about that, because once she traveled to Ohio, she started significantly bleeding. And she visited a hospital and they determined that she wasn't in danger of death just yet. And they did not wish to look at the evidence that she said she could provide them by connecting them to her obstetrician, that the miscarriage was already complete, that there was no more fetal heartbeat. They said, no, you come back tomorrow and we'll check your hormone levels then. She went home, continued to bleed in a bath, and when she tried to stand up, she lost consciousness and Only because her husband was able to catch her before her head hit the bath did she really survive that experience and was able to return to the hospital and get a blood transfusion to remedy the fact that she had lost an extraordinary amount of blood and that her life was gambled with by the medical professionals in that hospital because of Ohio law, because they were sufficiently confused, because the priority is no longer preserving a woman's life. The priority becomes complying with vague, unreasonable laws that promote the health of the fetus at the expense of the woman who is carrying the fetus.
Because he's the United States of freaking America. He represents every single one of them.
I should say things and then I should leave like a moment. That's a rhetorical skill I can learn to use. And I can fill that moment with at least writing things down. Yes. Maternal health care is compromised in the United States, and a lot of people do not know. If somebody lives in Ohio, they're still living in the same country as I am. I'm going to be concerned about that, even though it's a different state to the state I live in. You can't just dismiss outcomes for women in a different state. You can't just overlook these harms to women because you are so thirsty for manufactured pride and for a continuation of the hidden architecture of white supremacy. I'm going to elaborate a tiny bit on the hidden architecture of white supremacy because we don't think about it. It's not talked about very much. But the government supporting private health insurance supplied by companies, they are giving those companies tax rebates in exchange for those companies providing health insurance, which means the government, which means tax dollars, are underwriting companies with good benefits. They are underwriting that system of providing good benefits that's only associated with certain jobs. And do you know what? A lot of those jobs have a lot of gatekeeping mechanisms, like Black people's curriculum CVs being disregarded regardless of their educational accomplishments or experience or other qualifications. A lot of Black people's qualifications are disregarded. Are disregarded in favor of white candidates or white adjacent candidates in order to continue the system of treating white Americans as if they are more authentic and more worthy, of perpetuating a system of intertribal favoritism and in-group pandering. People might not talk about it, but on some level they know, and this is why white women still continue to vote Republican. They want their husbands to be getting those job offers without competing on an even playing field with people of color, specifically Black people. They want their husbands to continue to have a job without having to compete for those jobs with women, with other women. They have bought into a patriarchal dynamic where they exchange their passivity in the face of oppression. Not even passivity, because it's an active thing to do, to go into a voting booth and vote for a Republican who is stripping you of your reproductive rights, who is lowering the likelihood that you will receive medical care that you might need, that your daughter will receive medical care that she might need to save her life. You are willing to gamble with that, white Republican voting women, because you think you are so dependent on the systems that prop up your husband's employment and your ability to be comfortable in your own life. In-group pandering and in-group favoritism that falsely promotes white people and white Christian people as being somehow more worthy. History is a powerful antidote to that. Actual, true American history that puts an appropriate emphasis on the contributions of Black Americans and on the contribution of migrants. and non-Christian people. America is not possible without everyone's contribution. All right. Christopher says, I have experienced that throughout my life. All my credentials have been acknowledged, but I have been told they do not apply. Yes, there's always an excuse. There's always an excuse for gatekeeping standards. Oh, you're not professional enough. Your hair isn't straight enough. Thinking of comments made to women, but there's always some way of sustaining this massively underspoken about system of propping up tribal pandering. If I say tribal pandering, that kind of makes the whiteness less explicit, because sometimes people turn off if they think you're betraying the white tribe by talking about white imperialistic oppression. And you sound like a little communist. I don't want to sound like a communist, but I need white people to think about the systems that they may be propping up actively or passively or both. White people, white Christian people, yes. Okay, so tribal pandering, systematic tribal pandering, because it's probably an unspoken feeling of, I do this, and it just things get to be as they are. Because when it's a status quo, then change can feel destabilizing. So yes, we've got to hold white supremacist hands to a degree and say, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid that Black people will inflict slavery on you in order to even out the ills of the past. You can still learn history, and Black people will not try to enslave you. You can still learn about imperialist conquest and theft of land and theft of opportunity, and Black people will not try to oppress you to achieve fairness or to achieve equality. Nobody wants to try and achieve a parity of oppression. Even though, yes, if you subscribe to an Old Testament eye for an eye style thinking, then you might fall into that trap of thinking, if we allow for racial and diversity measures, then soon they will be saying, you have to go drink at the outside water fountain to white people. Oh, wow. Oh, Christopher, that's so hard. Okay, so you've been told that your credentials have been acknowledged, but they don't apply, only to find out that your co-workers have no credentials at all, and you have more credentials and experience than your supervisor, and he's even been dishonorably discharged from the military. Well, hopefully he doesn't watch the show. I mean, to be fair, it's very unlikely. This is a niche broadcast, and I'm working on my skill set in order to be able to do more with it, because these are things that need to be said. These are things that don't just need to be written in books. These are things that need to be said person to person. You need to see a human face delivering these truths, or hear a human voice delivering these truths. That white people are selling our collective safety. They're exposing our children to harm. They are endangering the planet. And the payoff for them, they're selling these things in exchange for a continuance of a status quo they know is unjust, but that feels just to them. They are selling they're exchanging our collective safety. They're selling off our chance at collective safety in exchange for the continuance of an unjust status quo which they sense benefits them. And we have to tell them there are other ways to get benefits. There are other ways. Don't be afraid. You can still compete in the workplace. Don't get comfortable in mediocrity. Don't be afraid of a challenge. Strive in a multi-pluralistic society. You'll probably be okay. Do not expose our children to the risk of mass shooters because you keep voting for Republicans who undermine our ability to pass gun safety laws. Do not sell out all of us who are in danger of increasingly severe and frequent extreme weather events because you keep voting for politicians who endanger us with their science denialism, keep endangering us with their stubborn refusal. Well, it's not just a refusal to acknowledge reality, it's more than stubborn, with their purchased loyalty to oil and gas companies. Their loyalty is for sale. Their policies are for sale. All right, and that's all from me for today. Thank you so much for listening. Oh, let's just end off with the end of this sodding. Oh no, 2 seconds left.
Terrible information, but this man has bled for us. This man has.
All right, so blah, blah, Trump has bled for us. No, everybody's bled for him. America has suffered involuntarily as a consequence of the actions of predominantly white people and white self-designated white adjacent people who voted in Trump to office. You're not even a majority of Americans because Trump lost the popular vote by 3 million in 2016, and that disparity increased to 7 million in 2020. Trump lost the popular vote, and America has all been hostage to the racistly archaic system of the Electoral College that allows for a distorted influence and impact of voters in white conservative areas where slavery used to be the economic system, and those who profited from that and passed on their inherited wealth and inherited attitudes to people living in those less densely populated areas, those areas with higher relative acreage of agricultural land that used to be incredibly profitable because of the practice of owning people and not paying them for labor and contributing to family separation and endless outrageous injustices. Those inherited attitudes disproportionately fuel the ideas and the loyalties of voters in low density, high agriculture states, and their voting influence has a thumb on the scale via the mechanism of the Electoral College system, which was included in the Constitution as a way to purchase the buy-in of slave owners when the Constitution was signed. The Electoral College system was a way of pandering to slave owners to reassure them that they would not be disenfranchised of their ability to own slaves by people in more populous northern states, because there were some voters there who were staunch abolitionists. And there were a higher concentration of abolitionists in the North and a higher degree of economic independence from the immoral practice of slavery. And that is what the Electoral College system exists to perpetuate, is a distorted influence, a distorted, disproportionate, excessive influence from those who have inherited wealth and points of view from slave owners. That's my concluding remarks. Thank you for listening. I have the same story to tell. I find different ways to tell it, but it's an important message. So if you want to share this broadcast or you want to provide suggestions on strategies to increase its palatability for a broader audience, more music, more sections, I always appreciate feedback. I have some very supportive, loyal audience members. Hello, you know who you are. And I'm open to collaborators and input contributors. Why I'm doing a praying gesture, I don't know, but thank you. Thank you to everyone, and thank you to any replay viewers as well. Take care, all the best. Bye.